Hi, good morning. Welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions 7 days a week. Alexander, let's jump into the first question.
First one this morning is from Andre Dole in Berlin. Having a Magewell UltraEncode AIO and vMix machine, which device would you use as primary encoder for YouTube and recording, and why?
Ronnie.
I have a similar situation in our company where we have kind of standardized, but back to the question, this is the device we are talking about, which is one of the really cool things from Magewell, which have two different inputs, HDMI and SDI, and kind of a powerful encoding engine, which is encoding multiple streams going everywhere, so to speak. It supports a lot of different protocols like SRT and the different types of recipients as well as. So I was thinking the thing that we are doing is we have the primary feed going to YouTube, since that is one of the questions parts, going to the primary stream using hardware. We are not using this device. We are using KiloViews E3s, which is kind of similar in type of capabilities, different inputs, HDMI, 4K, and SDI 3G, 1080, and going out on different types of protocols, including NDI, etc. And as a short answer, I would say go with the hardware for the primary, and if you have the option of taking with you the vMix machine, use that as a secondary. The reason for this is if you are trying to use the vMix for many different things, you can start to overload it. I know that the machine that Andre is having is a pretty powerful machine with good hardware attached to it. So I guess if you only run vMix as an encoder, you have a lot more options. Then again, YouTube doesn't like lots of options. So if you're not going to stream the different types of video to them, if you're going with the normal H.264, which is the RTMP stream, that is sufficiently supported by the Magewell encoder. If you're going to do some other clever stuff like HLG, you probably would go vMix and try not to overload the machine as well.
Jonas?
Yeah, I would say both, like Ronnie said. A thing to keep in mind is if you use vMix to do your production and then you output it into the Magewell and then stream it, you might have some issues there. That being said, the Magewell is really great. What I would do is, since it has two encoders, what we often do is with encoders that can send out two encodes, you use both of them and send them to the same machine. That way you can tweak your encoding settings and switch around live if you have any issues, like not enough bandwidth, you need to like modify something. That is a big advantage of that one. The one thing to also keep in mind is how do you get audio into them? Like with vMix, you can use a typical audio interface. With the Magewell, I would make sure that you have it embedded before you bring it into it. But both of them are fine options. The Magewell is probably a bit easier to manage, especially I know that you're very talented, but like it's how I often struggle with people do everything in vMix, and you need a lot of knowledge if there's not a rigid set of like, we can do this, but we cannot do this, that people just end up overloading it. So I would keep that in mind.
And John?
So if you're going down this path, what I always do is my output from whatever my switching is, it goes into SDI matrix. And there's always two inputs available. So if my switching goes down, I can either cut directly to a camera or I can switch over to like a standby screen. So I would do the encoding outside of vMix if you can. Being in one box is wonderful, but it's one point of failure. And just adding some additional components can really make you much more reliable and resilient to failure.
Next question.
Paul Vahus in Austin, Texas. I want to set up a second Sony ZV-E10 to my Atem Mini. Is Sony's IEDT the best solution for two-camera control in a Zoom meeting?
Go ahead, John.
So I don't think that you really get a lot of value out of the Sony Image Edge if you're trying to change a lot, but it can do basic exposure, it can do color, as far as setting the right color temperature, but there's not a lot of features in that tool. You would be better off going to the camera if it's in person, setting what settings you want on that camera, and then leaving it alone. If you're in a closed space, those settings aren't going to change. So plugging them both into your Atem, switch between the cameras, get the camera settings right before you sit down.
The only thing that drives me really crazy about the IEDT, the Imaging Edge desktop software, is when you set it up and you go to sign in, and maybe there's an option to not sign in, but when you sign in, I feel like you have to accept 3 different privacy policies before you can turn the thing on, which is like a ton of friction. And I've had, at least for the ZV-E10 version 1, whenever I would connect it with the remote viewer, it would stop outputting video on the HDMI. So it's completely unusable for doing any sort of live adjustments. That said, since I think you have the ZV-E10 2, they actually did update that camera so that it works with the Creators app on mobile, and that allows you to connect the camera to a Wi-Fi network or to the phone via Bluetooth, and you get those same sorts of adjustments, but with the phone app. So like John said, if you're just trying to get things set up and you're not trying to get up and stand up, sit down, and make those adjustments and things like that, you can do little fine things like focus. Like here is this is what that software looks like on the desktop, but you get the same control on the phone. You can change how the exposure is being set. You should be in manual. But here's where you can actually set all of those things. You can choose what the focus mode is. You can make fine adjustments to focus left and right if you're not using autofocus. But the big thing with the ZV-E10 version 2 is that it allows you to load LUTs into the camera the way that you can on an FX30 or an FX3. And I think the sleeper power tool of the Creators app is that you can load a LUT onto the camera from your phone. So if you shoot a color card, go into Resolve, make a LUT, save the LUT to your iCloud drive, then if you open up an iPhone, you can just say, okay, I'm going to take this LUT and throw it onto the Sony camera. Now all of a sudden, you can make all those little tweaks without having to get up and down. It's just, I don't have a good way to explain it other than eliminating all of that friction makes it a lot, I think, smoother to set up. But like John said, be wary of live adjustments. Like if you're in a controlled environment, it should be you get it set, and that's what it is. Go ahead, John.
So the last thing is, if you are on the older ones, the Monitor Plus app, it's a third-party app. It's very powerful. It's great to use, and it will help you with those same basic controls, and you'll get a little preview window as well.
It says Monitor Plus?
Monitor Plus, yeah.
And that works with ZV. Okay, well, there goes my afternoon. Thanks. Yeah. Next question.
It works with a bunch of Sony cameras. What feature set depends on what model you have. But they have all listed on their website. It's well documented. It's a really great app, and it's pretty affordable.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Next question.
This one's from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. With a budget of $500, I want to redo a lot of my home office to update lighting, screens, and general functionality. Ideas?
Jonas?
I really like the Elgato key lights. They are simple to use. You can use for companion through the app. I like them so much. I even bring them now to exhibitions to light everything there because my remote team can control them. With a budget of only $500, I would look into used things as well. Like maybe you can find a couple used Elgato Key Light Airs or Elgato key lights. Screens wise, I'm still one of those people that has everything in 1080p because that's where I work in, and I don't want to have issues with that yet. But one, depending on the type of work you're doing there, one really great screen is gonna pay off a lot better than a couple mediocre ones. When you have no idea how good your signal is. General functionality, if you already have a camera, then you don't need it, but like the Insta360 Link is pretty great. And I like getting a little light strips and making it a little cozy. So go to IKEA and spend some money there.
Bill?
So this one's a little bit tough because 500 doesn't go a long way in this, but there are a couple of things. First and foremost, I would, if you're in a home office situation, the very first thing I do is think about audio because they're generally terrible for audio. So if you don't have a solution that's good for that, the first place I'd look is to try to solve the audio problems of a typical home office. That might mean getting some kind of headset mic so that you can increase the signal-to-noise ratio and don't hear as much of your room. But if that's a check mark, if you're happy with your audio, the next place I'd look is a combination of lighting and framing. And what I mean by framing is kind of you want to paint a picture with your frame. You can see that most of us who look good on this show paid attention to not only our appearance, but the appearance of the room behind us. And a lot of us have taken to using controlled individual lights to kind of brighten up pieces of the frame, but we've looked at it like composing a picture. And if you want to be taken seriously in this, I would say that I would go with some inexpensive lighting, and I would try to make sure that I control the overall lighting, block out any windows you want. You can go to an art store and get black foam core that's pretty thick and kill the windows, and then whatever light you do put in there, make sure it's there for a purpose. The key light on you, and they mentioned Elgato, and there are some other companies who make inexpensive lights that can work for a good facial key light, but you also want to look in the back of the frame and say, what am I going to do in terms of bringing up the background levels and making them interesting, perhaps colorful. If you do those things, I think you're going to be way ahead of most everybody else that you're going to be competing with for your Zoom calls. And you're going to find that 500 goes pretty fast. But that's where I'd start. I'd start at the art store to get rid of external light. Then I'd start with some low-cost LED fixtures and learn how to control them.
Jonas?
And since we are talking about a bit of lower budget, when I started out and didn't have any money for light, I saved up a couple bucks and then I went to IKEA and bought this thing. They have these China balls. They are different version of those. They are super cheap. They break easily, but buy that and a couple of proper, just a bulb and a bulb connector, and boom, now you already have super soft lighting. Hang two of those overhead of you. You're going to have great soft lighting. You might not get the moody lighting that you might be looking for, but they're really great. And if you are moving, it's super easy to throw that on as the first temporary light, so you don't have just bulbs. And I've moved in here for 3 years now, and I'm still working on getting rid of those temporary lights. So they're multi-purpose, and you can reuse them.
You know, and it's interesting. A lot of these recommendations are coming around dealing with the basic physics of a room, either treating the room so that you don't get as much reflections or you don't get as much boominess in a room, and then lighting. Because you can take a camera that isn't the greatest camera in the world, but if you throw a ton of light at it and you are thoughtful about how you light it, then it is going to look a lot better. Another thing that I did is recently is I think I picked up some really cheap, like they were these Godox lights that were like I picked up 2 sets of these and a 5x7 or 5x6 diffusion panel that just had one that was like almost like a pop-up reflector that just had the steel band around the outside. And man, I took a space that was absolutely painful to put a camera in, and then next thing you know, I have a halfway decent looking image. I still have a lot of work to do in the room, but that I got the biggest bang for the buck in terms of budget there. Steve Uroff said in the chat, and this got a lot of love. Just define your problems, prioritize the problems. What's the best return on investment for your budget, and apply that to your priority list. You have to think about what am I unhappy about right now and how can I take it to the next level. Bill, wrap us up real quick.
Sure. I just wanted to note that I am typically on a Blackmagic 6K camera. It's about a 3,000 plus camera because it's off in service right now. I am on a $190 Canon camcorder. And because this set was designed and the lighting is where it should be, it doesn't look the same. That would be irrational. But it's still picking up a pretty picture. So that's why I'm saying it's not always the hardware you throw at things. It's how you design for the hardware you've got.
Your questions and votes do drive our show. Remember, you can use Makana to not only ask questions, but also chat about the questions, vote on the questions. If you don't have access to Makana, you can sign up at officehours.global/join. Sign up there. You'll get an email with links on how to get into Makana, how to get into Discord, all the good stuff. We'd love to see you there. Next question.
From the QR code, Musti in Germany is asking, when I connect my Rodecaster Pro into the Atem Television Studio HD8 ISO, I use the monitor out of the Rodecaster into the inputs on the Atem, just a cable between both. I get a very high-pitched background sound that's annoying. Why?
Go ahead, Alexander.
High-pitched background noise, well, that definitely sounds annoying. You didn't mention exactly what type of connectors. You mentioned the word Chinch, which is not a connector. So I don't know how you're connecting these two. You want to make sure that you're using balanced patch cords into the balanced inputs of the Atem. Don't use the RCA. So if you're taking the 1/4-inch TRS balanced outputs of your Rodecaster and you're converting that to RCA, that's going to give you an unbalanced connection. And on top of that, to make that worse, if you're going a long distance, like over 20 feet, now you've got signal loss and potential picking up line level noise, all sorts of problems. So you don't want to do that. The Television Studio does have XLR balanced inputs. You should be using those. I did a quick check because I don't actually own a Television Studio ISO, but I didn't see any information on whether or not you're able to, in the mixer control settings, to link two channels together in stereo. If you can't do that, you'll have to do, if you do want to send a stereo audio signal, you want to do the panning on the Rodecaster, and you're going to want to make sure that you've got the right cables. I'll just quickly show you here. So you are going to want a 1/4-inch TRS, that's tip ring sleeve, and dead giveaways, these two black rings. They're on the end of the connector, and you want to go to male XLR. And then, of course, on the Atem, make sure those audio inputs are not set to microphone signal. They're set to line, and you do have that setting. But if the cables you have only have one ring on the end, that means you're using unbalanced, and that's probably part of your problem.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, everything Alexander said is correct. I do have an HD8. We use it at the church. You are able to pair those XLR inputs in as stereo, and they do work very well for a Blackmagic device. They're acceptable as far as the noise floor goes for what we're doing there. But definitely I would stay away from anything that is unbalanced. And if the cable's long, you may be picking up noise. It could be ground loop isolation that is a problem as well. And you'll see, 60 hertz hum or really high pitched, like power supply whine, that it will get picked up by those cables. That is pretty common with unbalanced signal.
Ronnie?
I have no idea why I actually raised my hand on this question with these people answering. There is one thing that I could add, and that is a more general type of solution to all things problematic audio with weird audio coming in. And that is often related to the fact that we are plugging in equipment in different power outlets, and you can have some ground noise coming through. And one of the solving things that we tend to fall back to is the radial series of Magic boxes, which actually are made of unobtainium because they last forever. And this is the Pro AV2, which is actually just a fancy name for a DI box, which makes a unbalanced, noisy, potentially signal going into the box in different type of plugs, both jacks and mini jack and the cinch or the phone or the aux plug, which has different names according to where you come from. It also have a ground lift ground loop functionality, and is normally seen as a general solution to all these types of stuff. We also used the box the other way, the accompanying box, which is called JISO, which is the opposite way, where you go from a high quality balanced signal out of a sound mixer and going into an unbalanced, so balanced out from the mixers, going into unbalanced equipment like cameras, camcorders, Atem Minis, etc. And the JISO is I think that's the high-quality Jensen transformer. They also have a cheaper one from Radial, which is the normal transformer, which is a little bit cheaper. So those two are always in our suitcases when we go travel.
Courtney?
Yeah, a couple other ways to, everything said before was correct. I think your problem may be the cables if they're not well shielded, or they're not wired right. Sometimes those cheap, like the HOSA or some of those other cheap pre-made cables that are XLR to quarter inch may not be wired correctly, or they may have cheap wire in them, which lets things like cell phones and other high frequency sources leak in. I would suggest the Canary Star Quad, which can be wired for stereo. Both of the white both connect to one lead, and the blue connect to the second lead of the balanced, and of course the shield, it connects to pin 1. The other thing to look for, so that kind of cable, the way that the conductors are double twisted, they're each pair of the blue and the white are twisted together, and then the blue and the white are twisted around each other. That kind of prevents ingress of any type of electromagnetic interference that's floating around in the air. The other thing you might check is on the Rodecaster, make sure the Bluetooth input is not turned up, designed for receiving Bluetooth phones and things like that. Make sure that is dead, or turn off Bluetooth on it, because sometimes that Bluetooth RF can leak into the audio section, so you could look for that as another possible solution. And if you want to run you should run 2 cables out of the Rodecaster, one for left, one for right, into the left and right input on the on your Atem television studio. That way you'll have both channels without having to common one across both, and that way you'll be able to test it. And the other way to test it is to take that line out of the Rodecaster, plug it into an amplified speaker, and see if you hear the high frequency buzz there. Then that will let you know whether it's coming from the Rodecaster or from the Atem. So there's some solutions to how to troubleshoot that.
Alexander?
Great advice from Courtney. Actually, just talking about the Canary Star Quad wire, just reminded me too. On that note about cheap wires, one of the things that is not immediately obvious, because it's not always documented, but a lot of cheap cables, although they have shielding, they may not give you 100% coverage along the course of that wire. So this is where stuff like Canary and some of the higher end stuff like the Mogami brand of cables, they will actually advertise that they will give you 100% coverage of the shield across the entire course of the wire. And believe me, in environments now with Wi-Fi, with cell phones, with all sorts, we have such noisy environments now. Every bit of shielding really, really helps for every length of cable that you run.
Ronnie?
Yeah, and as a quick reminder, I can't remember if this was the Rodecaster, the original one, or the Rodecaster 2. We had one freak incident when we have a dynamic microphone connected to one of the inputs, and the phantom power was erroneously set on, and we got that squeaking noise. I can't remember the microphone setup as well, so just check that you have no phantom power if you're using only dynamic microphones. It could be just to be sure to test it. And another thing to do is to test the output not going to the Atem. Just test it with the speakers or something else, just to isolate if the problem is within the Rodecaster itself.
If you're not getting enough of office hours, just so you know, we've got 2 new evening shows for you. You can watch live or later. Thursday nights, we've got The Rundown. That's at 6 p.m. Pacific. And then on Mondays, we do extra hours, also 6 p.m. Pacific. And you can catch those live or later. Next question.
This one's from Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota, USA. Does anyone on the panel have recent experience running OBS on the Mac OS? If so, how is it working or not?
John Wallace.
Yeah, I've ran OBS since they released the M version, a stable version. It's been running fine for me. I would not trust it for production, but I don't trust the Windows version either for production if I'm doing something I'm paid for. But I use OBS all the time for personal streams, whether it's on a Mac or a Windows, and I have zero issues.
Jonas?
Yeah, I would say don't overload it. It's still a software, but OBS has been pretty stable. I use it for slates into Zoom meetings, using the virtual camera, test feeds. One thing to note is Apple's implementation of hardware encoders is not how the rest of it is. So sometimes if you use OBS on the Mac, you will get the wrong frame rate or bit rate because reasons. That is something to keep in mind if you want to use it more for Twitch streaming and things like that. Take a look at the other options that also exist. There's a couple tools now that are kind of doing what OBS does, but specifically for the Mac. That being said, even Apple is contributing fixes now to OBS. It really, would I build my whole production on it? Probably not. But if that is the budget you have and that you can use, it's fine.
And your two North Stars for running a computer as part of your video pipeline or as part of your workflow is number one, treat it like it's an appliance. Don't try and, while OBS is running as part of your stream, I'm going to open up Photoshop and edit a graphic or something like that. You're putting that additional stress on the machine, and that is going to show up in your production, or has a good chance to. The other thing is, whether it's in Activity Monitor or even OBS has a little CPU meter in the bottom right corner, keep an eye on your CPU utilization. If you start to edge greater than 40%, you need to start thinking about, do I need to put a beefier system into this part of the pipeline, or perhaps go with a different appliance? Next question.
John Foltz in Salinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Can you use the Blackmagic 2110 IP converter 3x3Gs on a standard network, for example, at a college? Can it navigate across vLans?
John?
Yes, it can traverse layer 3 networks. I would not trust in a college campus. I can't tell you how many networks I come across where there's a 1 gigabit uplink for a 48 port switch, and it's definitely not going to support that. There's also a bunch of things you want to do around priority for those packets to make sure they're arriving timely and getting the amount of bandwidth they require. But yes, it can work. No, I would not do it on a college network.
Go ahead, Jonas.
So if you ever wanted to talk to your IT team, the quickest way to have them knock on your door is to do exactly this and not communicate it with everyone. Keep in mind 2110, and in this case, we're talking about a 3x3 3x3G stream. You're gonna talking at least 1 gigabit per stream. Depending on frame rate and all that, it can go up to 3G. That's where the 3G comes from. But that is such an unusual usage pattern that, like John said, most of your environment is not gonna be built at all for that. You might run into an issue where one of the switch can't handle VLANs on their coprocessor and suddenly gets overloaded when you try to send 1 gig from one VLAN to the other one and things like that. So I would not put 2110 in an existing network. Can it work? Yes. Especially the Blackmagic things right now are happiest when they're talking to each other directly. So I would rather see if you can get a direct way to talk to each other. But this is something where it's really important that you talk to your IT team first. Otherwise, they will be confused and knocking on your door.
Next question.
From the QR code, Kent, Madison, Ohio. I apologize if I asked this question before. We are looking to build a kit for remote streams. Are there recommendations for a good, stable internet hotspot that we can travel with? What is the best way to get data for the hotspot? Thanks.
Jonas.
I would, like always, Peplink is what I would look at. I would use Max Transit Duo Pro is what I personally use for productions. It gives you 2 LTEs, one WAN, one virtual WAN over vLans. So that kind of is my base kit that I travel with. You could look, if you want something a little bit cheaper, that's a Peplink B1 5G that I would look at. The advantage is you have one SIM with that, one modem with that. As for data is a bit complicated, especially if you are in the US. In the US, you will realize that there's a big difference between retail data and the data that you can buy B2B. Normally expect to pay between $6 to $10 per gigabyte if you're buying it through any of the non-retail resellers. It is fine to use retail, but be aware of the limits. Often they have it's unlimited until you use 50 gigs a day. So then it's really just 50 gigs. Keep that in mind. That being said, Peplink has their own eSIMs now that allow you to do data pooling. They do not have pay as you go. They have you pay, I think it's $200 for 20 gigs, which is pretty good for the US, something like that. And then you get that for that SIM cards. I have had luck in Europe to use Orange and their SIM cards. They are pretty cheap on the dollar, but that is once again retail. We have some deals that we got in Europe were about $5 per gig there, but the US is still pretty expensive. So keep that in mind, build that into your quoting. If you don't use it as much, Telekom in Germany and Europe, for example, they have 1 day unlimited hotspots. All of that, keep in mind, is that you will probably still need a phone that you can put that SIM card in to activate some passes or something like that. And it's something that you need to manage the risk of them just randomly turning it off because they decide they don't want to do it anymore, or you are not using their fair use policy, and especially in countries that don't have laws for net neutrality. Keep in mind, at any point in time, they can decide that what you're doing is less prioritized than the rest of what you're doing, especially in countries like the US. You might run into issues with sending SRT hotspots and all that.
You can ask questions 24/7. We've got askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global or askofficehours.global, or just here at the QR code. It's fast and easy. Nothing to sign up for, nothing to log into. You can just go to askofficehours.global, throw in your name, throw in your question. We'll work in it over the next couple shows. Next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada. What version of Linux would be best to use on an old i5 desktop to run Companion on? Nothing else, just Companion.
Good, Jonas.
It might not be Linux. I would love to just use Ubuntu 22. We use 22 or 24 right now. It's a single one command to install it. But since this is part of your production now, how able are you going to be to handle issues with it? I hate to say it, but Windows might be the solution here just because you know how to fix problems. Simple things I need to have a static IP address, or DHCP, I need to ping something. That being said, if you're fine with the risk, hit me up on Discord. I have a tiny script. Or if you go to the Raspberry Pi version of Companion, they have full documentation on how to install it. It's really simple. It's great to update. You can back up and all that. But keep in mind, now you're using Linux, and when you're under stress, do you really want to work with Linux at that time if you're not experienced with it? That being said, Raspbian could also work on a small computer, but I would just use Ubuntu. We've had great success with that in the cloud and locally.
It also looks like on the bitfocus Companion GitHub page that there's quite a few people who are rallying around using one of the other Debian Linux systems. So I'll throw a link in the chat to what I was reading about that, but you're looking for stability here. You don't want anything experimental. You want whatever the flavor is. It's what is the most stable? What is the least likely to fail? Because that's That's the ultimate price. Next question.
From the QR code, James Babb in San Diego. At a Zoom meeting where no participant can share their screen, how can I show a slideshow in my Zoom box, maybe with or without showing my image from my camera? What hardware and software would be required?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'll give you a simple hardware thing. Remember, here, if you're not a host or otherwise controlling the meeting, all you have is your contribution. So you have to inject these signals into the contribution. What I'm doing is that I have my a little Atem Mini switcher, and I have another device. In this case, it's an iPad. So if I want to show something like this picture of a mountain gorilla I took the other day at the San Diego Wild Animal Park, all I have to do is switch to the gorilla, and then I switch back to myself. And there are the basic configurations to be able to put picture-in-picture in a window and things like that. So I think that's the simplest way. Some contribution thing that's creating. I often run Keynote on that, but you could run PowerPoint on a PC or something like that. Those go into the switcher, and that means that the one contribution you have going out into the Zoom meeting is totally under your control. You can switch to whatever you want when you want.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I agree with that. An ATEM switcher is great. That's what most of us are using here. Another possibility would be to get an HDMI to USB input and convert a second output on your computer or a separate computer's HDMI output into a webcam input, and then into your Zoom meeting, you'll have your regular camera input and your webcam and this external webcam input, and just switch between those two video sources on your video input in the Zoom meeting. That's the cheapest way to do it. Probably for about $9-10, you can get one of those HDMI to USB converters that'll convert your HDMI outputs of your computer or another computer into a second webcam input.
Jonas?
This is a great use for OBS if you're able to install it. One thing to keep in mind, Zoom is pretty good at it, but especially on macOS, expect some issues every time you update your OS. Virtual webcams seem to be a little iffy for a little bit. That is something to keep in mind, also on the Windows. So like in my OBS, you can just cut around. You can even use, if I pull my OBS over here, you can even use preview mode. So like here I see what I have in preview and program. But that is something where OBS really shines because it allows you to have like simple 1 in, 2 out, switching a little bit, having a virtual camera. That is like really simple, and I like using OBS for that a lot. Otherwise, you could use NDI tools. It often comes down to what is your IT team allowing you to install if you have an IT team. NDI tools, you could use screen capture and virtual input and get a camera in that way.
Ronnie?
Yeah, and you have Mimo Live and such applications for Mac, like OBS you can use OBS, of course, on the Mac as well. But another thing you can think of, if you have if you are allowed to do that, I've done that one time really on my heel, just in a pinch. I opened my iPad, started sharing the keynote into a Zoom, and just shared the iPad screen. I think you can do that with a phone as well. So if you're continuing having a separate device, you can have your camera going into the Zoom meeting, and you can have the producer or the host co-host to pin for everybody your iPad coming in. So that's one way to do it.
Courtney, wrap us up.
Yeah, one thing to take into consideration, we forget about it all the time because we're lucky enough to have a 1080p Zoom meeting here, and a lot of other people don't have that ability for the people to submit 1080p inputs. So if you're just showing a slideshow, 720p may be okay for you. If you've got a PowerPoint presentation with small type, it may also be a problem if you're coming in at 720 or lower resolution on that Zoom meeting. If you're using your same input for your camera as for your slideshow coming in, it may not be at full resolution, so take that into account. Sharing screen may give you full resolution if you do have 1080p. Where you don't share your screen, you may not get full resolution.
Remember, the built-in screen share in Zoom is going to prioritize resolution and readability over frame rate. So if you have any sort of video playback or any sort of animations, those things are going to get tripped up and might end up looking a little, have dropped frames or look framey. Whereas if you're doing it within the video, then it's going through that other pipeline. So you have to take the things that Courtney just mentioned into account, like resolution, readability, those sorts of things. So however you're going to do it, it would behoove you to run a test in a different meeting, not with everybody else, of what does this look like in a standard 720p meeting, and actually have someone else run your slideshow and you look at it from the other computer and say, am I happy with this? Next question.
Steve Uroff in Madison, Wisconsin. I do quarterly all-hands meetings at offsite auditorium via Teams. Might the Zoom H3 VR be suitable for capturing audience input for the meeting?
Bill Davis, start us off.
You're going to run into all the standard problems of physics and audio in a large space if you're trying to capture anything in an auditorium. Now, for general overhead, kind of like applause and things like that, you'll get something. The problem is if you have somebody that's nearer to the mic than somebody else and they're shouting or they're asking a question, you just can't beat the inverse square principle. I mean, it's just how sound works. And the farther the microphone is from the person you're trying to hear, the worse the results you get. I mean, this is an interesting thing, and it's doing three-dimensional, but it still can't alter the distance between whatever you're trying to hear and the microphone, or in this case, microphone array you're using to capture it. So, most of the time, you'll see a couple of spaced overhead microphones to get general audience sounds like applause and things like that. If you're talking about getting actual questioners in the audience, this would be a terrible solution. And really, the best way to do that is have either a mic you can pass around to people in the audience or positions on the floor where they can come up to the mic and ask their questions. That's the only way you're going to get high-quality sound. Outside of maybe having a boom team getting a microphone to them, but you just can't affect the physics of getting a microphone close to whatever sound you're trying to get. My 2 cents.
Alex Knight.
Yeah, I think this is the wrong tool for the job that you're doing. Whether you're trying to capture just audience sounds like applause or something like that, or if it's you actually need people to ask questions, which I'm assuming that's probably what you're doing. I think both of those instances, the H3 is the wrong tool for the job. If you need people to talk in the mic, the simplest, most reliable, most inexpensive way to do that would be some wired SM58s. Just put them on stands, get people to walk up to them and talk to them. Now, if you need to pass around a microphone, probably a wireless solution. If you don't want to invest in a good one, what I would suggest you do is find your local rental house and rent something that's actually a professional wireless system. Don't skimp in this area if you're doing wireless, because you'll run into a lot of problems. Baseline for what I would consider for professional use, I wouldn't go with anything less than a Shure SLX-D series. You should be able to get that at a lot of places, and they're sort of reasonably priced. QLX, ULX, they get quite a bit more expensive. So I would just rent something if you need to pass a wireless mic around to the audience, and like Mickey in the chat said, I mean the H3 has an unbalanced 3.5 millimeter jack. You really don't want to use that in any kind of professional environment.
Jonas?
You're using Teams. You are already in dangerous territory. One thing to keep in mind is don't try to be smart with Teams. Like, the problem is use Teams in the way that it is designed. It is designed for microphone relatively close-ish, hopefully, to a person's mouth. If you're gonna stream like ambisonics into it, I wouldn't use that. Depending on the culture of your company, buy 2 catch boxes. That could be fun, throwing catch boxes around and having people talking to them. They're built-ish for something like that. Like, that is one solution. Otherwise, multiple mics, and a good comment from the chat also is like, I do like having like a stereo atmosphere below everything, but like that is not something that Teams will be able to deal with well. So it's probably not worth it. Before I use a mic like that, I would probably just hand out mics.
Get the questions into text. Try to avoid the mic in the audience if you can. If you can get the questions into text, I think you accomplish two things. Number one, you're able to offer things like voting on the questions, screening out the ones that are a little off topic or maybe inappropriate. But also you eliminate the ability for someone to kind of grandstand and say, okay, I have a mic now, so I'm going to use the fact that I'm able to ask a question to send some other message. And 90% of what I'm going to say is me blathering on it, not actually answering the question. Just a thought. Coming up on Office Hours, we've got our live-only shows over the weekend there. It's a members-only weekend. We've got on Saturday is our 1-hour Q&A, and Sunday is our more philosophical show. We talk about office hours. People can ask about the show, express what they think is working, what do they think could be better. We talk about the industry. It's looser, it's fun, but remember, you've got to be in Makana to see those shows. So head over to officehours.global/join to make sure that you're in for those. Next question.
Tommy Shanson, St. Paul, Minnesota, USA. Is there a rule of thumb for routers and switches? I understand less is more, but what is the best way to stack them?
John, start us out.
If you need stacking, you should use a switch that actually has a stacking ability. I don't know that less is more is a saying. Typically, you don't want to stack switches beyond 7. I try to keep our stacks to less than 5. But we're using Cisco switches 9300s with the Stackwise cable and power, and we're properly distributing the power and the Stackwise, so we have redundancy between chassis. Just understand that you are creating a single point of failure. That switch will operate as one switch. So if you lose one, the stack will reboot. So depending on your use case, stacking switches may not make sense. If you're looking at combining a lot of switches together, you should start looking at aggregation. Aggregation switches will allow you to have multiple disparate endpoints and manage that as layer 2 or layer 3, however you need to. But it does allow that to be redundant in a sense as well. So like we have all of our stacks go back to 2 different aggregation switches so that we can withstand any sort of failure. But, all of a sudden, if I have 5 switches reboot, I have a lot of end users who are impacted by that. So stacking for us is convenience and for upload and just saving on optics costs. So it's a sacrifice on one side or the other. So just be careful when you're making that decision.
Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington. When it comes to running multiple instances in the cloud, is there a difference between AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud for media production?
John?
Sorry, double muted. So when it comes to media production, I think AWS has a lot more built-in native functions. So if you're looking at spinning up a solution using the native functions of a platform, AWS is going to get you a lot further. If you are just rolling your own solution, you can be in GCP, Azure, or AWS, and I don't think that you'll find a difference. I use all of them on a day-to-day basis. They all have large backplanes and support all the different workloads that we need.
Jonas?
AWS is the cloud provider that is most invested in media and entertainment workloads, especially cloud production. If you don't have the expertise, that is probably what I would look at. Azure, we have had, is less fun to manage. There are some advantages that you can get normal Windows servers there. There are some advantages to using certain SDKs. But in general, the thing with AWS is the VPCs and the management seems to be more straightforward. And also, it's really great for all the different things that you have in there. Because what you can get is Media Connect, Media Live, all of those services. So if you don't want to spin up your own environment for every single thing, then I would go with AWS. The other ones are also fine, especially if you need to search for GPU instances. But VPC management and existing solutions, existing guidelines, existing solutions on the AWS marketplaces, why we choose AWS instead of GCP or Azure.
Next question.
Archie Trivedi from Daytona Beach in Florida, USA, and here on the panel. What do you all feel about the tube lights? It seems they give you soft lighting, but what are your thoughts?
Bill?
I think of tube lights as a one-trick pony. Now, it's a good trick, and if you need that trick, it's a great way to do things. I mean, they're portable. They generally don't take a lot of power, so there are a lot of battery-powered ones that are really useful. You can mount them horizontally or vertically, and when you mount them in those two different ways, you're going to get two different things. Number one, the catch lights in people's eyes and things like that are going to be either vertical slits or horizontal slits, and that may be the kind of look you're looking for in portraiture. On the other hand, they have a problem, and that is most of them are omnidirectional, is that they push light out in all directions around the tube. There are some controllers that I see some of the new tube manufacturers sending with them, including things like grids and some sort of baffling. Some of them are only 180 degrees of the 360-degree tube is actually emitting light, so that'll keep light from spilling behind you into things you don't want it on. So they can be really useful, but I still consider them as not a generically useful light for somebody who knows how to light, because I can control only one dimension of the spread. I can't, like with a single point source, particularly one with a Fresnel and barn door, I can't shape them into the kind of light projection that I want, because one dimension is a lot longer and thinner than the other. Summing up, I like them, and they do a really good job of what they're good at. And for a traveler who wants to use them in a hotel room or something like that, the fact that you can take that long, thin light source and bring it around or farther away from somebody's face, you can get some interesting shadow stuff going on. And if you have to open up, for example, the light sockets of somebody with a ball cap, that kind of light, bringing in a horizontal light beam can be really useful for that. So, they're a tool. They're a good tool, but it's not the only tool I would want to have in my arsenal.
Courtney?
Yeah, Bill covered my basic reason for not using tube lights is because they're not very controllable. You got to be careful too, if you're going to use them, to keep them behind the lens, especially if they're the 360-degree type that emit light all the way around. There's some that have a black back on them, or you can run a piece of tape down one side of it. But you're going to get lens flare if you get them in front of the lens, because it's very difficult to shield them from flaring into your lens. I generally prefer panel light for a nice soft. The nano lights on the tube lights are kind of expensive. They're around $2,000 for a set of 4 or 5. These are pretty cheap, about $76, and these come in a variety. These are newer video lights, the NL288. These have external batteries that can go on them, so it runs off one of those N-type cells. It holds 2, so you can ping pong them and switch the batteries out without losing the light. They have a newer one that has built-in. This one here has built-in battery power on it. Also, their RGB version. This one's a dual color, and this one here has a built-in light. It's a little smaller panel, a 12-inch, and they make them in 12, 15, and RGB color that work with an app, so it's easy to control. Like you'll see on the tube lights, the ones that I mentioned earlier, the NAN lights, which look like these, they're controllable from an app as well, I believe. You can control RGB with those as well. They're good to use for architectural lights or set lightings if they're going to be in the shot. You just need them for an accent or something. Tube lights are great for that. But for lighting people, I don't really like them.
And John?
The lights you're seeing behind me are tube lights. So I have a long tube light that's throwing the color, and then a little one that's throwing a little pink on the door. So you can definitely see they're useful. They're practical. They obviously have a lot of built-in. They're mostly made for to be a factor practical lighting, or augment other types of lighting you're using. They're definitely useful if you're traveling. I know Alex, I think, uses 2 of the smaller NAN Light 6Cs when he's traveling. So there's definitely use cases for them. It's clean light, which is nice out of those. Some of the other panel lights, including I'm using the Elgato panel lights, they definitely have a green hinge to them. And so I just corrected my color, pull some green out, and I look okay, I think, maybe. We'll see. But when I watch this back later, just be aware, if you're sacrificing one side or the other. I have room. I could put different types of lighting in my office. These are the lights I had, so I just kept them. In my previous space, I was just in in the living room with my wife and my family, and I wasn't going to put a big giant fixture there and look even crazier than I already did with 3 screens in the corner of in the living room. So it's all about balance and just figuring out what works for you. But I would try them. Amazon has great return policy. They work, great. If they don't, send them back and try something else.
Yeah, I also have a handful of these PavoTube 6Cs, and I just wanted to mention that this is only at about 22%, but it's not exactly throwing soft light. Like, you can see the shadows as this light moves around the room, so positioning is going to be very important. If you are traveling with it and you're considering being in a hotel room or something like that, the towels that they have are usually white. So it might behoove you to, get the little quarter 20 that's on the bottom of this thing and bounce the light off of a white wall or off of a curtain or off of a towel so that, hey, I've got a light source that I can control and I can have be color temperature accurate, but I can modify it in some way to go ahead and make it softer. If you're finding office hours valuable, there are a few ways that you can help. You can give some value back to us. You can obviously like and subscribe to the channel, but you can also donate at officehours.global/donate. We're a nonprofit, so we certainly appreciate that. And there's always opportunities to volunteer, so you can sign up at officehours.global/volunteer, find out what it's all about. Next question.
Icarkin in Seattle, Washington's asking, my bitfocus Buttons Lite trial expired. Is it worth $39 a month for use with the Streamdeck Studio?
Go ahead, Jonas.
I would say it depends. Do you need a broadcast grade control system? If not, probably not. It really works well with Companion as well. For larger installations, and if you do a lot of routing, yes, I think they have some really cool features for that. Outside of that, we're still using Companion for most of the things, especially with Companion 3.4 or 3.5. I don't know which one is coming up. They also will have the ability to use different versions of the plugins or modules, which then I think Companion will still be the main thing that we use, especially if you also use other Streamdecks and all that. That being said, yeah, I mean, they are now stable, so they are charging you some money for it. But I would say it's a steal for a broadcast control system. For Companion replacement, maybe not.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
Yeah, totally agree with Jonas on those. I made this question for ourselves, and that is a kind of, if we can't control a system or a gadget or a thing with bitfocus Companion, and there is a professional plugin developed for buttons, yes, it will be worth it for professional use. Just one of the functionality that Buttons provide that Companion does not is to let the developer of the plugin protect their code. So where bitfocus Companion is all open sourced and everyone can look into all the plugins and APIs and how the unit communicates between those two, the Buttons can provide the developer with some kind of security. So they can protect their APIs, they can protect their way of communicating towards the devices to prevent other developers to utilize remote control systems. So in the future, I think we will see more and more professional equipment being controlled by Buttons. And of course, that is depending on how you are controlling stuff and how many units you have, and if this is a master control room or just a home office. So I think the amount of money they want for Buttons is, as Jonas said, a steal for controlling everything.
Jonas?
The only thing I wanted to bounce off is Companion is also getting support for being able to load plugins directly without publishing them through GitHub. So that will come in the next version as well.
Next question.
Clive Kitchener in BC, Canada. What format is best for converting AVIs for editing in Final Cut Pro?
Go ahead, Bill.
Final Cut's native format is ProRes. It's the Apple technology behind everything. So if you're bringing in something that's not in ProRes, they do license a lot of interior codecs, then things will work, but there has to be some transcoding typically in the background. So if you have a choice, ProRes, there are many flavors of ProRes. So it depends on the source footage coming in, how much data is in that. Is it something really high res and high bit depth? If so, you might want to use ProRes HQ or one of the higher formats, even ProRes 444 if you're going to be using it later on. And if that data is in the original signal, if not, standard ProRes is regular ProRes, ProRes HD. Any of those variants will keep everything native, and Final Cut will love it and work super fast and smooth with it.
And I always get caught up on not every Mac native tool likes the AVI file format. So when you're trying to convert, it's like, what are you using? I end up using something like FFmpeg to go ahead and put it into ProRes, and then you're taking that ProRes, as Mickey said, putting it in an MOV or an MXF wrapper, and then a DNX HD and DNX HR work great as well. So, but you're going to have to budget the space for it, but ProRes all the way. Let's go one more question.
Okay, this one is from the QR code Garrett Gray in Oakland, California. If I want to access my Atem or X32 from a different LAN without doing router configurations, computer hosting, or remote desktop, what cloud services could I use to accomplish this? Twingate?
Jonas?
I'm glad that we have so much time because this is really a complex question to answer.
Hey, you have 30 seconds to explain the world.
You basically ruled out any solution for that. Like the Atem and the X32 do not have a native way to connect to things. If you don't want to configure your router, you won't be able to use even Twingate or any of that type of solutions. You will need a server or a jump host or something of that kind locally with that. And then you can use Tailscale or something like that. Keep in mind, the Atem isn't only restricted to a single port of TCP or HTTP. It has a lot of ports that it uses, UDP, TCP, so it's really hard to use that one. You will need to type in the IP address, but you can do it through Tailscale. Same thing with the X32. The X32 communicates mostly over OSC, which has the advantage that it is a single port, but the X32 also needs to reach you because it's sending feedback to you, which is now we're getting into needing to be able to do a site-to-site VPN, which you can't just do with Tailscale because you need to change your computer configuration. So I think you will be out of luck with this one. But if you add a computer, everything can be done with that.
And Mickey says he would deploy a WireGuard server, or better yet, talk to the IT department instead of trying to work around them. And to which John chimed in, hey, you might get it working, but IT's going to see what's going on and shut it down. So, but JJ really has the best answer. Send a remote control robot on site like Wally and just control it via drone interface. You'll be fine. It'll be fine. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It really is a privilege to spend my Friday morning getting smarter, and we have lifetimes of experience that come onto the panel today and every day to offer that freely and answer whatever questions you all come up with. Thank you to the producers for asking those great questions. It really is impossible to do the show without you, and we've been getting every single week so many questions that we're having to send some back. So just a reminder, if you asked it via the QR code, we'll work that in. Starting on the Monday show, we'll start to work those QR code questions in, and the Mukana questions, they are back in your notes. So if you go up to notes, you'll see the questions, and you can ask it next time you're watching. Finally, thank you to the back-end crew who work all the time, not only making the show run, but keeping us organized, keeping everything moving forward. It's really a pleasure to be here every single day. Synologic traversal today, 33,000 miles. That's 54,000 kilometers, 265 million bananas for scale. See you in after hours.
We could have done a whole
Jonas.
second hour on that last. Just
know,
saying. I was like, is he gonna throw that one? Yes, we're not talking about it today. Like I have slides, everything ready.
It's like asking. So we got 2 minutes. Explain camera work.
I should have. I got out of sync. Thank you for wrapping that the way you did, though. It was nice.
Well done.
A live lighting demo, though. That was exciting.
Yeah, that was fun. We got to play with.
Live is live.
Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Have a good week,
All right,
everybody.
see ya.
CJ, where was the dog when you demonstrated the lights?
The dog is not on show anymore. The DJI Fetch, as she's now known.
Dog's in the doghouse. It's sad.
Yeah. But it's funny. I can't even watch